And what I'd like to sort of explain to you is how I got involved in animal mutilation research and how I came to be involved in two major cases that occurred on Dartmoor about 30 years apart. But before I get into describing these events, I'd just like to say a quick thank you to Anthony and Rachel for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today. And I know that they've made a considerable commitment, both financially and in their time, to put on this event. So thanks to them for that. In 2000, the year 2000, I was at home one day. I wasn't thinking about UFOs or anything like that. I was listening to the radio, or half listening to it. And incredibly, it was a radio phone-in about government secrecy, which I was half listening to it, and I was about to go and switch it off when a caller came on and said that they knew somebody in the BBC that had told them that 15 Dartmoor ponies had been killed on Dartmoor in 1977, sorry, in the 1970s they said, and that it was one of the biggest government secrets imaginable. I'll just move back here because I think I've actually just move that forward. Apologies for that. And I became electrified by this because I'd read at the time, sometime in the 70s, about this case that had been put down to sort of aliens zapping the ponies, and I was absolutely agog because I'd always been interested to know what had actually happened. So I was energised to investigate and look into this particular case. And when I did so, a few things became apparent. That one, there seemed to be hardly any reference to it on the internet, and I spent a long time trying to find any article or date that sort of tied into this particular case. So I found a reference eventually through an article by Bufora that stated that the incident had taken place around, I think it was the 14th of July, and they'd investigated it, and there was nothing untoward about it. So armed with that date, the 14th of July, I thought, well, that's great, at least I've got the date when it happened. So I began to sort of look into it. I went down to Tavistock, went through the local papers there. I went through the local papers in Birmingham, where I live. And the one thing I found was that all the papers had got the same date, the 14th or the 15th of July. But when I got down to Tavistock, I found this local paper, the Tavistock Times. This was a big case for them, and they reported it on the 3rd of June 1977. So straight away there was a difference, a timing difference. I then found out that the incident had actually been reported on the 11th of April 1977. And it was first reported in the local press, first week in June, which was like 2 months later. It was very strange. And the national press coverage wasn't until mid-July 1977. And basically what had happened was that in mid-July 1977, a local UFO group had gone to the to the scene of the crime, as it were, with metal detectors and Geiger counters, because they asserted that the injuries, which were horrific to these ponies, they had been the broken limbs and rapid decomposition and various things, and they claimed that it was a vortex from a UFO had picked these ponies up and thrown them down. Because the gentleman that had come across these bodies had never seen anything like it before in his life. He'd been walking on the moor for 25 years. He'd never seen anything like it. But what happened was, his investigation was reported in the local press. The Nationals got hold of it. Ponies massacred, UFOs, put them together. What a great story. So it went right round the world. And a lot of people still think that the incident actually took place on the 14th or the 15th of July. So don't believe everything that you read in the papers. So that's the first thing. This is a typical one from the Daily Mail. Dartmoor death riddle, flying saucers, blah, blah, blah. This is the Daily Mirror. It was in the Daily Mirror for a couple of days. What I found out was that there was 15 ponies and 1 sheep that were killed, and many of the bodies had really been very badly mutilated. The police, the RSPCA, and MAF, which is now DEFRA, were informed the day that it happened. This is on the 11th of April, 1977. There's various theories put forward, lightning strikes, disease, poisoning, all that sort of stuff. But MAF actually sent their own vet to investigate. I have tried to get hold of the report, and apparently they don't keep anything older than 25 years, so I was told. The other thing that I found out from speaking to local people is that the army was involved, and there were claims by one person who said it was squaddies out training, which they do a lot on Dartmoor, and that they got hungry, so they'd shot a few ponies and they'd eaten them. But I can assure you that was not the case. Because the one thing we know from the investigation by the UFO group is that there were no metal fragments found at the scene, so you'd expect to find bullets or the remnants of bullets. This is a picture that appeared in the Tavistock Times. It was taken by a very well-known photographer in the Tavistock area. It's a fantastic picture, and the photographer's name was Jim Thorington. He went up there with a reporter. It's 2.5 miles to get to this place, so it's pretty remote. To give you some idea, there's a tree line just at the back there, and it's 2.5 miles. That's the main Princeton road. I think it's the B3272. And the big hill at the back is Bellevator, and that's 3 miles away. So this is in a very remote place. White Tor is to the back here, which you can't see, but this picture tells us a lot. It tells us how remote the area was. And look at the victim. There's a pony down there, but look at his head. It's completely bleached. This picture was taken, I think, 3 weeks after the death. This is a picture sent to me by Linda Moulton Howe, and I'll put it in here because, again, we've got almost identical. This is the first noted case of animal mutilations that probably we got to hear about in this country. It was in 1967, and it was a horse called Lady. All the tissue from the shoulders up have completely been removed, and it's completely bleached. So if you just look back on the Jim Thorrington photograph, you can see that it's a similar thing, if not identical. Here's a general map of the area, and you can see Post Bridge is just there. It's pretty well right in the centre of Dartmoor, quite a remote place. Post Bridge itself is a hamlet. There's just a few houses there. There were other events that happened in 1977. There was a renowned message from space received on the 26th of November 77. When Ivor Mills was reading the news bulletin, somebody or something overrode 5 TV transmitters. And nobody knows how that was done. That's an incident that you've probably heard of before, but it happened in the same year that the ponies incident. Also at the same time, there were a lot of mysterious explosions in the southwest, and the origins of these explosions still hasn't been determined. So having looked at the Dartmoor ponies case, I decided that I would contact the Western Morning News Library Department, and I spoke to a lady there called Nicola Holgate and asked her if she could be kind enough to check her records to see if there were any bizarre animal attacks. And she sent me, I think, 3 cases through. One involved sheep being driven down by a car, and unfortunately, people get drunk and they do stupid things. But one of the cases was extremely interesting, where it claimed that there were 7 sheep found dead in the shape of an occult star. And I thought, well, this is quite interesting. This seems a bit off the wall for me, and I thought, I'll go down and I'll have a look at the place where this happened and see if I can gather any information. I actually went down on the 1st of April 2005, and this incident actually occurred on the 2nd of January 2005. So there was a heavy occult message going out from this particular attack. This is a photograph taken on a mobile phone by Adrian Cole, a farmer's son. They attended the crime scene, because that's what it is, it's a crime scene. These killings are covered by the Criminal Damage Act, which means people can be prosecuted for this kind of behaviour, and obviously the farmers themselves suffer a loss. So he took this picture, and the first thing that struck me was, this doesn't look like an occult star. So the Western Morning News and all the other local papers soon got in on this and, sacrificed in an occult ritual. And what you'll find with a lot of animal mutilation cases is that they will use that excuse to cover up what it actually is. This is a picture taken by one of the farmers, Frank Yeo. He's the partner of Mary Alford, who owns 6 of the sheep that were killed here. Again, this is a much better image, but again, I ask you, where is the occult star? One of the things that struck me about this particular image is the sort of unnatural way that victim there particularly is lying. It's just very, very strange. I interviewed the witnesses that were there on that morning, and I asked them to do a diagram of where they thought the bodies were. And this plan here gives you some idea of what the collective consensus was of how the bodies were lying. But again, it looks nothing like an occult star. I mean, I don't know what your impressions are of an occult star, but this looks pretty random to me. I spoke to one of the farmers who told me that it was apparent that the 7 victims had been kept in 2 holding areas, A and B. And he said the strange things about this was there were no signs that the areas had been fenced off, yet it was apparent that the animals had been kept there. How, we don't know. Because he said as they stood there, their feet go up and down and they create a muddy patch. So he said, in my estimation, he says, and these people know everything about sheep, absolutely everything. He said, the incredible thing is, he says, they must have been there 20 minutes while whatever it was doing what it was doing. The other thing was, he said to me, I can't believe it, he said, that these sheep would have been corralled and didn't mess themselves. He said, 'cause let's be blunt about this, when animals go for slaughter, sometimes they know what's coming, and it is unfortunate. But these victims didn't. It was as if they were kept there in docile fashion and then systematically killed. This is the part of Dartmoor. This is higher up from where we've just been looking. I spoke to the vet who attended the scene, and his words to me were, I've occasionally seen sheep killed where they've been lifted up and the head's twisted and they've died. You know, he says it does happen occasionally. But he said for it to happen 7 times, because he pronounced that all of them had been killed the same way, he said is absolutely extraordinary. What he didn't do was he didn't look into the mouths, because I asked him, had the tongues been removed? And he said, well, I didn't. He said, I didn't look, he said, but they'd all died the same way, through a broken neck. So I did very little else other than see what other background information I could get, and I made contact with one of the farmers that had lost the most sheep, a lady called Mary Alford, and I said to her, please keep me in touch if you get another attack. So nothing happened until about mid-October 2005. I did warn her that they would come back. I said, I'm sure they're going to come back. And of course they did. On Friday the 14th of October 2005, they came, they took 4 sheep off the moor. They then transported these sheep into a field which had got a locked gate on it, and the walls to this field are about 7.5 feet high, and they mutilated these animals and laid them out in a rough square, which is really quite incredible. The following night they came back and they took another 4 victims, and this time this was actually on the moor itself. The police were concerned enough to send SOCO, which is Scene of Crimes officers, on Sunday the 16th, the day after the second attack. The papers, again, got in on the act of the pagan symbol, moorland sheep were sacrificed and all that sort of rubbish. This is an image taken by Mary Alford herself, one of the victims actually on the moor. There's a shot of another one. And this one, when I looked at this, I knew straight away that we were dealing with something extraordinary, because you can see the tissue has been cut away. We'll come back to this later. This is the makeshift altar where they claim the sheep were sacrificed. Police forensics didn't find any blood or anything on it. And there's 3 stones there set in a fleur-de-lis pattern, which apparently they now claim is some sort of pagan symbol. The pagans get blamed for a lot of things, and it's really quite unfair, to be honest. I couldn't get down there at the time very quickly, but I did go down in mid-November, and just come back from that, and I decided that I was going to try and sort of take the battle to them, and that we would do I'd do some surveillances, but I needed somebody to help me. And it was very difficult, because nobody wanted to know, hardly surprising, who wants to spend all night on Dartmoor, freezing cold, wet and all the rest of it, in the hope of catching alien perpetrators of animal attacks. It's just crazy. But I did find somebody, and his name was Dave Gillam, who runs the Q4 group in Cornwall. I went down mid-November, and we carried out. It was not a very good night to start, because the mist was terrible. We could hardly see anything. We eventually parked up off a track that was just on the edge of the moor, and at about sort of 2 o'clock in the morning, because we could hardly sort of see anything, and Dave and I were sitting in the car talking, and I sort of looked behind me. I thought, oh, there's a car coming along the track. That's unusual at this time of the night. And it then became apparent that it was not a car, but there was a beam coming from a nearby field that was shining up Pew Tor. It was really quite a scary thing. I didn't know what to say. I mean, we jumped out the car, and it stopped, but I saw it, but Dave didn't, unfortunately. So I went back down again in December, again on the 14th to 15th, because I thought, well, maybe if they attacked in October, 14th, 15th, maybe they would attack again, because there's this thing about the full moon, which we later found didn't really become a factor. But it has been mentioned by some researchers to be a key date, that when there's a full moon, you seem to get an increase in animal mutilation attacks. So one of the things I did, there were no attacks. I checked with all the farmers. It was a terrible day. It was dark and overcast. I parked my car in the track exactly where it was on the night in November, and took a couple of library shots. And I thought, what I'll do is I'll just take a couple of library shots, and what I'll do is I'll be able to use that as a reference. Now you can see there, that's the field where the beam came from. I didn't get to see this picture properly until probably 3 months afterwards, when I showed it to a local UFO group. And there's a being or an entity of some sort round the back of the car. Basically, I took a shot, I went into the car, I then took 2 shots outside. I never saw any of this. This appeared on the image afterwards. And I took another shot, and it's, again, almost the same as that. And we call that the Owl Man. I don't know what else to call him. I don't know how clearly you can see it. But there was another thing that we had, somebody's pointed out that there's a diminutive alien or entity with his arms akimbo in the back of the Jag. I don't know whether you can see it there. There's the pixels, we might have lost it a bit there, but anyway, I think just the arms there and the head. So this was really a bit of a shock to me, because this was one thing that I didn't anticipate coming across, was sort of entities that suddenly turn up on images. Round about March 2006, we were down there again doing some surveillances. This time I was with my son-in-law. Hired a cottage for a week so that we could do sort of 2 or 3 nights. And while we were there, I spoke to Mary Alford, the farmer, and I expressed my frustration that we couldn't get good pictures of some of the attacks, that the time delay in the information getting to me was not quick enough. And I said, it's particularly a shame, I said, in relation to the attacks of the 14th and 15th of October. And she said, oh, you don't have to worry about that. The police took loads of pictures. Oh, right. So I then went to Tavistock Police Station. Went on 14th of March. I actually went on the 13th, Monday the 13th of March. And I went there at 5 o'clock. There was a line of police cars outside. But it was locked because the police station is only open from 9 till 5. So crime doesn't solve itself. If you want to commit a crime in Tavistock, best to do it after 5 o'clock and before 9 o'clock in the morning. I went in and I requested the police file. I was very naive at that time. And they said, hang on a minute, we'll just go and check with the sergeant upstairs. Policeman came back, he said, yeah, we can see no reason why you can't see this file. But what you've got to do is you've got to go through the proper channels. Oh, right. What you have to do is you have to write to Middlemore headquarters. So I thought, oh, right, that's exactly what I'll do. So I wrote to Middlemore, and their Freedom of Information Act officer wrote back, and I'd asked for the photographic images and also any forensic reports. Didn't ask for anything else. Came back. Because it was treated under the Freedom of Information Act, I eventually got a reply after first clarifying my request, and then I had a refusal notice that was dated in 16th of May, and they refused my request under three or four sections, which was prejudice the prevention and detection of crime, prejudice the apprehension and prosecution of offenders, third-party information was contained in the file, which in actual fact I later found out was Mary Alford's name, and that information had been given in confidence to them, which is not the case at all. So I was a bit annoyed about that, because I thought it would be pretty straightforward. So I then appealed to the police. And you may not know this, but if you get refused an application under the Freedom of Information Act to the police, what happens is the police do their own appeals. So not surprisingly, although we had the force information manager involved, On the 4th of August, the appeal was rejected. So I just got nowhere. So I thought, right, I'm going to appeal to the Information Commissioner. And I wrote to the Information Commissioner's office on the 30th of October. And then in November, I received an acknowledgement saying that because there was a big backlog, I would have to wait for a case officer to be allocated. I then had an email on the 30th of July from the Information Commissioner's office saying, did I want to discontinue the appeal? So I said, no, I didn't. And then at 3 monthly intervals, I would get an email from the Information Commissioner's office saying, we are waiting to assign a case officer. And this went on. This was the 6th of June 2007, the 9th of August 2007, the 31st of October 2007, the 11th of February 2008, and the 7th of May 2008. Finally, on the 5th of June, I got allocated a senior complaints officer. And the first thing he asked was, can I clarify my appeal, which I did, and I offered to accept a censored file so long as I had the images. So I waited to hear from him, and eventually on the 5th of February 2009 I had a decision notice from the Information Commissioner. One of the things I found was that they had changed one of the points, section 30, to investigations. I don't know why they did that, but they refused my appeal. So here we are, we've gone from 14th of March 2006, now February 2009, and I've got nowhere. So I wasn't sure what to do. I then found out that you can appeal to an information tribunal. So I decided to do that, and I then got together my grounds for appeal, which was one, that the ICO had changed the relevant section to section 30. Section 40 was not relevant. Media coverage had prejudiced the police case. There was a possible miscarriage of justice, because if they arrested somebody and charged him or her, I knew they hadn't done it, so there was that potential. My offer of help to them was that I would bring some expertise to it and that it was in the public interest. Number 6, the police had closed the file. And number 7, national security. I felt there was an issue because these attacks had been going on in America and in this country, and therefore, if they'd been going on 2 continents, it obviously raised an issue that we were dealing with something that was extremely capable, had fantastic technology, and was obviously a threat to the UK. I waited and got a response from the tribunal, from the Information Commissioners. I had a 13-page document, something like this. This is the format. And it was page after page after page of case histories and stuff like that. And basically, they completely squashed my appeal. And they rejected all the grounds of appeal and applied for the appeal to be struck out. So I now had to prepare an application to stop this appeal being struck out. And this meant that I really had to sort of up my game a bit. And the first thing I did was to take 4 of the grounds out and to major on the 3 which I felt I had a good chance of doing something with. One was media coverage, the other one was that police had closed the file, and then there was the issue of national security. So what I did was I cribbed from this. I took this layout, because they sent it on as a PDF file, and sort of changed it round, and I set it out exactly the way that they set it out. The tribunal, incredibly, accepted what I'd put and said that the appeal should not be struck out. So that was the first, but there was a bonus to this because they said that the proceedings would now be joined. By joined, legally they mean included. That the Devon and Cornwall police have got to be within the process, and that they must also give reasons in writing for non-disclosure. So now it's me versus the Information Commissioner and the Devon and Cornwall Constabulary. The police defence was interesting. They said the photographs would disclose the investigating techniques of the Devon and Cornwall police. Releasing the images to the public could have an adverse effect on the community as a whole, as if all those images from Afghanistan and all the other things that we see on our television aren't bad enough. So, one of the things that happens in a legal case, I don't know whether any of you have ever been to court, but when you're involved in the legal process, and you may hear about this sometimes on sort of legal dramas on the television, you get a thing called the bundle, and this is the bundle for my case against the Devon and Cornwall Constabulary and the Information Commissioner. And in it, it has all the documents that both parties are prepared to disclose to each other, and that they have, if they're going to use them in the case, they have to give you a copy of them. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. I'll have a little look through this. And as I had a look through it, I found a series of notes, of telephone conversations and emails between the Information Commissioner and the police. And basically what the Information Commissioner had tried to do, who was the senior complaints officer, he probably thought to himself, oh, this is ridiculous. Can't have all this. There's got to be an easier way. And he tried to negotiate with the police on my behalf for me to see the images without recourse to the Freedom of Information Act legislation, and basically to avoid an appeal or where we were right now. Within these notes, the police said that, yeah, they'd consider the offer, but they would need to go to ACPO in order to get some advice on this. And ACPO, of course, are non-elected. I don't like unelected bodies like this. Maybe some of you don't either. One of the nasty things about ACPO is, to me, it seems to be a separate little group of people that have got wide-ranging powers. And one of them is the Confidential Intelligence Unit, which spies on dissidents like myself, perhaps, I don't know. So they refused the offer to disclose the images. So now it's a fight to the finish. The final submissions were made in September 2009. And then on the 5th of October 2009, we got the verdict. And it was a unanimous decision only on the first ground of appeal because they didn't even consider the other two, and I won the case. So it took me 3.5 years to get these images. Now, the images came with a 2-page letter about copyright, so I couldn't use them without their permission, which is a bit frustrating. I've given copies to David, I've given copies to other people. I couldn't get permission from them to show these images to you today, but if you want to go and look on my table, I've got the images there, and if you want to go and have a look at them and see what you think, please do so. I hadn't thought about that one. Well, if I'm not there and you do it, it's down to you. So, yeah, we eventually got those pictures, and I think they're quite important pictures. If you want to have a look at them, please have a look. Just make sure I'm okay time-wise. Are those pictures that you eventually gained access to in any way different from the regular pictures that you or others had already taken of mutilated animals? Are they exceptional? I think they were exceptional, yes. They were exceptional because they were taken by somebody who knew exactly what he was doing. And, well, they're fantastic pictures, really. I couldn't have taken pictures that well. That's for sure. And they're the definition on is incredible. You know, it's really, really good. And they sent us the original raw data for them as well, which we couldn't have used in 2005, but now we've got the technology, we could probably blow them up the size of this wall, you know, and you wouldn't lose any of the definition. Part of the definition was they weren't showing anything that you hadn't already seen in terms of injuries. No, in terms of injuries, these were all classic mutilation injuries. I mean, there's some slight differences, but you know, they were classic mutilation injuries. And I have to say that I think the police themselves, to a certain level, don't have the expertise to deal with this kind of problem. And I think the reason there was definitely been a problem with the higher echelons of the police force becoming involved in this, because it's definitely become some sort of political issue. And the involvement of ACPO makes me feel very suspicious indeed, because I would have thought it's something that could have been dealt with at a lower level, but no. They waited 3 weeks, there was a lot of toing and throwing, and then suddenly, no, that's it, no, we're not going to show these images. But anyway, they lost out because of that. So Dave Gillam and I continued our nighttime surveillances on Dartmoor, and we've seen some strange stuff. Particularly one night, I think it was on the 15th or 14th of May 2006, we had an awful lot of activity. The book, much of the information I'm giving you now is really from the book, and the book's got a lot more detail in it. And I would urge you to sort of either either buy a copy, please, or go to your local library and order a copy and read it, because there's a lot of stuff in there. We filmed one or two strange things, and on this particular night, I'm going to show you a sequence of pictures now that came from, which is part of some footage that we took. Basically, see there, this object suddenly appears. Well, this is about 4 o'clock in the morning. And you can see there's a light beginning to appear on it. And then you can see it gets brighter and brighter. And basically, what's happening there is there's an object that seems to have landed on Barn Hill where these animal mutilations are being carried out. And I suspect that the doors are opening, or an aperture is opening on whatever this object is. And inside, there's not a searchlight or anything coming out. There's a really intense light inside. And you can see there's a bit more, until it finally goes. Now the incredible thing is about that particular sequence is that it happened in about 1.5 seconds. So whatever it was came down on the moor, doors opened, something either went in or came out, they closed and it went, all in 1.5 seconds. So you often hear about UFOs landing and you assume that they're going to be going fast, or certainly you'd expect them to be travelling at a rate that we could probably understand and could probably watch. But these, just imagine all that happening in literally 1.5 seconds. This is another thing that we saw on the moor. The same night, lights were appearing and seemed to be moving towards us in a sort of intelligent way. Some were red and some were white. And we picked this up. This is from the time is wrong. It's actually 4:45. Oh, thanks, David. So this thing came off the floor of the moor and exited to the right of us. We don't know what it is. It just happened in an instant. A month later, we were back on Dartmoor, and this injury here is incredible. This is the cookie cutter. You can see it better there. And basically what happens, they remove tissue. This is called the cookie cutter because it was so called from America, where they uncovered a lot of these. And basically it's a serrated edge. It's, you know, those sort of things, you get the pastry and you wax something down, you get a nice little star shape, whatever. When you have a look at these, it's got serrated edge, but sort of rounded, and it's in layers. It's the most incredible thing that you've ever seen. You can't tell me that these are done by occultists or anybody else human. It's absolutely incredible. This gives you an idea of the activity we had. Lots of attacks. In total, we had 18 attacks and 70-odd victims. But you can see where most of it is centred around Barn Hill. That seemed to be the main place that they were interested in. I asked somebody to do a ley line map for me, and they came up with this. And what we found was that very close to Barn Hill, there's a convergence of ley lines. Again, I don't know whether that's anything to do with it. That's Pew Tor. Dave Gillam and myself would normally do our surveillances from just about there, looking across. I photographed a number of strange things on Dartmoor, and you know, you hear about orbs. You can see you've got some orbs here. But what about these rectangular things? And there they've moved. I don't know what they are. There's strange, bizarre photographs. You know, if anybody's got any suggestions, I'm willing to listen. This was taken from Pew Tor, and a bit perplexed about this because I've taken a few shots from up there, and they're usually clear images, but I'd never had this turn up. And somebody said to me, "Oh, there's something on there." I wasn't quite sure about that. And here's another image, and again, it's been pointed out to me that there's some sort of ghostly face at the back. Again, it's very strange because all the blotchiness about it, it's only on those two images, and I've never before or since managed to capture the same sort of atmosphere up there. This is looking across to Coxtor, and it's just here where most of the attacks have taken place. There's a white object that I took a picture of. I don't know what it is. It's not a sheep, by the way. So the attacks diminished, and we came down to the stage where I think there was one victim in 2008, and I think that was the last one. This picture of Dartmoor is interesting because this is where the penultimate victim was found. And what they actually did was, this was one of the Alfords sheep. They took it from a field that was 1.5 miles away. The Alfords are big landowners. They took this sheep, they brought it to here. This is just below Barn Hill, and they mutilated it. And the farmer couldn't understand. There was a lot going on the farm that night. We cannot understand how anybody could have done it, and we'd not seen anything. So that's some of the fun and games that we've had on Dartmoor. The one thing I should mention is the instance where I went down in June 2006 and decided that I was going to take one of the victims back to Walsall with me to have it post-mortemed by a vet. I'd already arranged with a vet that I was likely to do this, and she had agreed. I made several calls on my mobile that day to tell her that it's on its way, and asking her what time I needed to get it to the vets for. But I only used my mobile. I didn't tell Dave Gillam, I didn't tell Mary Alford, the farmer, the identity of this vet. I took it to her. She did a post-mortem on it, and there were a few interesting things about it, one of which was that the tongue had been removed. And there was also some, as she put it, some strange fluid in the eyes. Didn't think any more of it, other than I collected the post-mortem report from her, and made sure that it wasn't posted. I made sure I contacted her using my mobile, and at no time did I think that anybody other than me knew the identity of this vet. But one Friday I got a call at work, and what happened here was mentioned in Silent Killers, and they had to take legal advice because they didn't want to disclose my details to the environmental health officer. In fact, in the book there's a full transcript of my discussion with the environmental health officer. And I did sort of go on the attack with him, and I couldn't understand how they knew that I'd had this sheep brought back because we didn't trust the local Devon vets. So when I got it, about sort of 3 or 4 days after I'd had the phone call from the vets saying that they'd been contacted by the EHO, I rang the environmental health officer again and I said, well, can you tell me where the request came from? Because they'd originally said it was the regional vet. And I didn't know whether it was Stafford or Devon. Anyway, he said, oh, it's the regional vet at Stafford. And I think there's 12 regional vets that cover the UK. And I asked, well, so did it just come from there? How did they know? He said it was all done by email. He said, and I'll ring you back when he said, it might be on my desk somewhere. So he rang me back. Amazing. I didn't expect to hear from him again. He rang me back in about 2 minutes. He said, I've got it here in front of me. He says it was all done by email. And he said the request came from the regional ministry vet at Stafford, and they had the instruction from somewhere called Leahurst. And he didn't know what Leahurst was. Well, of course, we know what Leahurst is. It's just down the road here. It's Leahurst campus. It's the main DEFRA animal disease surveillance centre. So the instruction had come from DEFRA. Now, I can give an update to this because when the phone hacking scandal was going on, I thought, I think I'm going to have some of this. I know what I'll do. I'll find out who it was at DEFRA at Leahurst. I'll find out who it was, and then I'll sue them for damages or something. Yeah, but it's worth a try, isn't it? So I wrote to the environmental health officer. He's a nice man. And I got a reply back saying, can't remember. No, can't remember, no. So I wrote to him again, please can you recheck your records? Oh, yes. We've had to look through. We did actually he sent me a copy of the fax that he'd sent to the vet, which was handwritten. But no, it's not quite what I want. Now, can you send me, so another letter, can you please send me a copy of the email? At this time, I'd already sent a letter to Stafford asking them for details of this email. And I had a letter back from the environmental health officer to say, no, it was all done on a phone call. No, it was all done on a phone call. No, there's no email. All done. I mean, do they think I just made it up that they had an email instruction? I don't think so. And guess what? Stafford, we don't know who the person was that might have instigated this. You'll need to write to Worcester. They've got some office in Worcester, which I wrote to. Of course, it came, very sorry, we don't keep copies of any emails. So basically, they have covered their tracks. I'm still optimistic that at some point I may get the opportunity to get that email and that somebody might leak it to me. But this shows you what we're up against. And I think that what you'll find with David and Richard and myself, what we're fighting here is a truth war against government secrecy. And we've got to win that war. And that's part of that war, there's a series of battles that have to be fought. And it's very, very difficult. believe you me, there's plenty of times I never thought I'd ever get involved in this because I never thought it was anything to do with UFOs. When I started out to look into the Dartmoor Ponies incident, I thought it was nothing to do with UFOs. I thought I was going to uncover some other big government secret. But now I've stumbled across this nightmare scenario and I've got to be driven because there's not many of us doing it. There's David and Richard and myself and probably a couple of other people in the UK who are probably considering this problem, looking into it. And it is difficult because you don't always get the information quickly. You have to travel long distances to remote places. But it's something that's got to be done. And bear that in mind when you listen to Richard and David's talk, that it's really quite a difficult area of research because it's not nice and clean with nice little lights in the sky. This is the really dirty end of researching. This is really, really difficult, and they do not want it to get out. That's for sure. I'd just like to sort of, I'll just bring it to a close now. Just something I'd like to say about this conference and just generally the way things are. I think anybody that would have looked at the Olympic opening ceremony, I don't know what your thoughts are on it, but it was an incredible show, and it was incredible in my opinion because of the innovation that was in it. It was not a hugely expensive thing. It was innovative, and it was inspiring, and the efforts of all the athletes, but especially ours, is equally inspiring and uplifting. And at this time, I think for this nation that's given quite a lot to the world, television, jet engine, the internet, computers, I think it's entirely appropriate that the politicians should try and become statesmen and announce not only to us but to the world that there really are things going on in the skies above us, and that they disclose what is the biggest secret in the whole world, and what a fantastic thing that would be, not just for Britain but for the whole world. And I think that Britain has to show the lead. I'm probably hoping for the impossible, but that's what I believe. And I think we'll leave it at that, and if there's any questions, I don't know whether we've got time for questions. Anthony's not here. Anybody got any questions?
Has there been any recent activity?
There's been a lot of activity, yeah. Recently, yeah. I mean, certainly in the southwest, David probably got more information than I have. I'm working on a couple of projects at the moment, and David's, I know, has done some work. Yeah, David will bring some new cases to you. There's certainly been some activity in the southwest with some ponies being killed and horses being killed. What makes me suspicious about these reports is that they're being written off as pagan and occult sacrifices, and you always know when you hear that there's likely to be something else behind it. But there has been activity, and quite honestly, there's a lot more activity than we even realise at the moment, because this is a problem that doesn't affect farm animals only. It affects birds, it affects small animals, mice, foxes, hedgehogs, you name it. going all the way up the food chain. And I know what you're going to say now. Is you're going to say, oh, well, what about the human element? At the moment, I haven't got any actual evidence to put before you. If I did, I certainly would. But it's understandable that the government would not want to cause panic about something like that. And they may feel the same way about animal mutilations. The one thing I would say is that it's official government statistics that I think from 2001 to 2004, that on average 224,000 people a year go missing in the UK. What you've got to remember is that those are the people that are reported missing. The vast majority come back, you know, and it's sort of some of them go missing for a few hours, some of them for a few days, and some of them for months, some of them for years. Some of them are just never found again. And if you just took 0.25% of that total, it would be 550 people. Now, I don't think that serial killers are that busy in this country.
Are there reports throughout the world of mutilations?
There are, yeah. In the book, I tried to go through a whole list of countries where I would think you could go to any country in the world and you would be able to find an example of this activity. Because it's certainly not constrained to the United Kingdom and certainly not to America. For a long time, this was thought to be just an American problem because a lot of people in this country didn't know. They didn't read David's articles because David is a bit of a pioneer in this particular field. Well, the pagans are a much maligned and misunderstood people. I had as part of my research, I had an interview with a guy called Steve Jones, who's a lay preacher, who had been to a pagan weekend. Can you believe that? A pagan weekend. And at this weekend camp, he told me that a new initiate had been sent out to gather firewood for the fire. And he'd gone out and got all this dry wood and came back with it, all very proud, oh, I've got all this. And they looked at it and said, no, you've got to take it back and get some more. Because there was lichen and so forth and moss on this wood. And their reasons for refusing it was that they did not want to burn or kill another living thing. And the pagans have this saying of, do what thou wilt so long as it harms no other. So they're not the people that go out and cut a sheep's throat or anything like that. You know, they just don't do it. So for the police to accuse them, as they did in June 2006, that they are the perpetrators of these sheep attacks is absolutely outrageous. It's slanderous, but the pagans just seem to ignore it and just carry on. I don't really know whether there's that much witchcraft and occult sacrifices done. I certainly don't think that they would be done in some of the areas where I've been to and where I've seen some of the attacks on animals. I think that I'm not denying that this sort of activity doesn't go on, but I really don't think that it is a factor in these. It's one of the things that they use to try and cover up the animal mutilation attacks.
Animal mutilations, the autopsy, what do they actually have removed from the tongue?
The eyes are removed. One of the things that I had with the Dartmoor ones, and the vet sent, I brought 3 animals back in total, and she sent the livers from each animal to Birmingham University because she wasn't happy about them. She said that there were, her words to me were, these livers look a bit strange, something's happened to the liver. Now, I've got a post-mortem report from a government scientist, though I'm not going to say how I got this, I shouldn't have really had it, but I've got it, and on it says that the liver was friable. In other words, the vet had obviously, the pathologist obviously mentioned this and thought that it had to be, it ought to be disclosed in the report. But I've heard numerous things said about the livers of animal mutilation victims, particularly in America. There was 3 horses were killed in one case, and the livers had been the cause of death, and it had been assumed that they'd all had some sort of the same liver disease, and that they'd all died at the same time, and it just didn't stack up. And the researcher, who I can't remember, it may have been Donovan or somebody like that, said that it just defied credibility that that could be the case. So there is these internal injuries involving some of the organs that are also involved. I mean, there's a whole list of things. If I can just go back to... let me just bear with me a minute. I'll just... because I meant to bring in these particular... right. I did 3 slides for this, and I perhaps should have told you about these at the beginning. But the removal of the tongue is a well-known one. There's also a small hole in the top of the head, and people think that they've been shot, but they're not. David can tell you a lot about that. He investigated one case where the police were convinced that all these sheep had been shot in the head on one windy... Sorry? Pigs. 40 pigs. Well, I'm thinking about the Stoat case, Chepstow. Yeah. There's also puncture marks, which can be confused with big cat attacks. Rectal coring, that's a bit nasty. They seem to have some fascination for removing the material from the rectum for some reason. One or both eyes removed, and they're not pecked out. There's a big difference. If you see an animal that's been either attacked by dogs or attacked secondary predation by carrion crows or magpies or something like that, the bodies are a mess. They are a complete mess.
Just ask the question, is that, have you considered that all the wounds and injuries on these animals are in locations where it would be ideal to take radiation testing from, such as soft tissues, organs, eyes, tongues, etc.?
You mean for
Why it might be done in the first place?
why they're doing it? Yeah, I don't know, because one of the problems that we have here is that we've got a lot of information, but what we don't know is the true motive as to why they're doing this. And we can all speculate. My opinion's as good as David's opinion's as good as anybody else's. But the fact of the matter is that all we can do is speculate. I think it's some sort of sampling program, and that is based on the fact that the animals that we have found to be mutilated form a very small percentage of the animal stocks of this country. And the other thing I would like to say is that the foot and mouth epidemic probably has washed away a lot of potential cases.
The
It's through my mobile phone. They accessed my mobile phone records. It was the only way they could do it. Because I thought, well, how did they do that? Where did he get the number from? And I went and saw the vets. And I spoke to the vet and the practice manager. I remember the meeting we had. I said, look, just tell me if you've had to notify anybody. She said, nobody from here has said anything. We wouldn't need to, she said. And the fact that they took legal advice to see whether they should disclose the information to the environmental health officer shows that this is quite a rare event. But yeah, they access my mobile phone records. And these are the people who are hammering News International and everybody else. But I'll tell you now, if I get that email, I'll be straight onto them at Lea Hurst to try and put in a claim. There's a tendency for it to be sort of on the top of the head to sort of like the forehead. But there's a lot of UK cases, and David could probably tell you more than I do. David's got some interesting pictures, I think, of hedgehogs and fox and deer suffering those sort of wounds. Yeah. Gentleman there. Well, we don't know how it came, and we don't know how it went, because it suddenly appeared and it suddenly went, and it didn't fly. It's not actually a UFO. It's a UGO. It's an unidentified ground object, because it seems to just suddenly appear on Barn Hill and then it just goes. It's a really strange thing. Well, in my experience, the perpetrators of these attacks don't want to be seen, but they've got fantastic technology. One of the interesting things is that in the attack on the 2nd of January 2005, during my discussion with the vet who attended the scene, he said to me, "There's something very strange about all this," he said. He said, "It really is weird." He said, "But apparently somebody went up at 7:30 in the morning when it would have been not quite light, but getting light. And they didn't see anything. And then somebody went up at 9 o'clock, and there's the bodies, and there's the mayhem." Sorry? They could be coming from underground. I mean, I personally haven't considered that, but that is more than a possibility, because they've got that ability to do, in my opinion, almost anything. The other thing I would say is that as regards the areas where they like to attack, it does tend to be remote areas, but you'll also get... Sorry? Yes, remote and hilly areas. It is possible. I wouldn't rule it out. But there's no ground disturbance generally found. That's all I would say to you is, now I'd assume that there would be some sort of ground disturbance if that was the case. But, you know, who knows? There are times when they will strike very close to civilization. I've known instances where they've attacked animals virtually in the barns and very close to farmers' houses. So, you know, these attacks can pretty well happen anywhere, but they do seem to prefer remote areas. Sorry? Chupacabras. Well, I've read something about these, and I'm not. I don't think it's the chupacabras, to be honest. That's my feeling. Other people might feel differently, but we don't have any reported sightings of bizarre. I mean, they're pretty bizarre things. There's a lot of reports from South America that these things are about, but we don't get anything like that in this country, and I'm sure we would. I mean, we're a fairly close nation, you know. There wouldn't be that many places where I think chupacabras could be breeding or living without people finding out sooner or later. So I personally don't think it's anything to do with them, but they could be responsible for some of the animal attacks, like in Nicaragua or wherever.
I have these horse mutilations and whatever.
Yeah.
Did the military turn up or anything?
The military turned up at the Dartmoor Ponies incident. I've been told by 2 people, I'm not mentioning the names, and I don't know for what purpose. Personally, I think it was to try and sanitise the area, keep people out while they did some tests themselves, because I think it's one of the earliest reported UK animal mutilation cases. That's what I believe.
Do you think they got rid of the pest at the time, or were they on the technology somewhere else after being some sort of occasion?
I don't know. I think certainly what they needed to do was they certainly needed to do some sort of research in the area. And I think if you look at the delay in the news actually getting into the press, particularly the local press, I think that tells you volumes. That they went in there, probably they may, who knows, even at that time they may have had tracking devices that could have said, oh, there's something come down in the moor, what's going on? I mean, there's a lot of UFO sightings from Dartmoor itself, considering it's such a remote area. I mean, I've got I've got 2 chapters in the book on UFO sightings just in Dartmoor, which is incredible.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it there, but please show your appreciation for